Okay, the next thing that we have to do is finish building our cart dropdown. So for our cart dropdown, we're missing the empty message that goes here when the user has no cart items, as well as the actual linking of our go to checkout that takes us to our checkout page. So let's first handle this empty message. So inside of our cart dropdown component, what we'll do is we will conditionally render a span or our cart items depending on whether or not the cart items array has a length that's greater than 0, right? So for us, type coercion of 0 will be false anyways. So if it's not falsy, right, if there's a value greater than 0, then we'll render our cart items. If there isn't any items, then we will render a span with the class name of empty message that says your cart is empty. Now, cart items. Now, maybe this is a good time to talk a little bit about type coercion in JavaScript. So we know that 0 is something that will evaluate to false. If I do 0 equals false, we're using the loose equal sign. So there's two types of equivalents in JavaScript. There's the double equals, and then there's the triple equals. Double equals just checks if the values of the two things are the same. And what it will also do is it will try and coerce the types on the left and the right side that we're comparing. So let's say, for example, the string of 1 and the number of 1. They'll try and coerce the value of the string over to a number. And then they'll compare the values. So once the string of 1 becomes 1, well, the values of 1 are the same. Whereas if we try and do a triple equals, we'll find that it gives us false. Because with the triple equals, that's a strict evaluation, which is looking at both the type of what we're comparing and also the value. So because the type of our string of 1 is a string, and then our type of our number is a number, then we'll get false when we try and do it this way. Now, inside of JavaScript, there are 6 type of things that are considered falsy values, which means that if we were to put them in a conditional, like an if statement or our ternary operator, then it will return false. And those 6 things are 0, false, undefined, null, not a number, and an empty string. These 6 things all evaluate to false, which is why when we set default values inside of our reducer, we tend to set them to the empty version or the falsy version of what they'll be. So if they're going to be an object, we set them by default to null. If they're going to be a number, we'll set it to 0. If it's a string, we'll set it to an empty string, right? And if it's true or false, if it's a Boolean, well, that doesn't really matter. More so what state we want that value to be inside of our reducer when it initializes. And the reason for this is so that we can conditionally render like the item itself, or we can render an empty state, right? And that's essentially what we're doing here. We're saying that if the cart items.length is equal to 0, then render an empty message. If not, then we will render out the actual cart items. And now, let's just apply some of the styles that we need to our empty message inside of our cart dropdown styles. And what we'll just say is that empty message class will get the styling where the font size is 18 pixels. And our margin is 50 pixels auto. There we go. Now our message is centered. Okay. Now for our actual go to checkout button. Well, first let's create the actual checkout page. So let's go to our app.js, close these other tabs, and also make a new folder for our page called checkout. So we'll close this folder, and let's make a new folder called checkout. Inside, we'll just make a basic checkout component after making our usual files, checkout.styles.sass. And inside, we'll import React from React, import in our style sheet. And usually, as we always do, we're just going to declare our checkout page and make it a basic functional component that just renders a div that says checkout page. Right? Just so that we know everything's working. Let's export this by default. And then inside of our app.js, let's bring it in. And we'll put it underneath all our other pages that we're importing. Just so that we know that all of our page components are together in the import statement, right? We can even separate it a little bit so that we can see it a little better if we want to set them by their respective sections. And then we'll just add a new route here where the exact path goes to our checkout page when we hit checkout. Now, the reason we're not doing it for shop is because eventually we'll actually do shop / and then a category like hats, jackets, men's or women's. But here we'll just add in our route, point to our checkout page, because we don't have anything after checkout. Like there's no / checkout and then something else, at least not yet, that we can think of as far as our app goes. And now let's just set up our cart dropdown to have our history action to push it through. What we'll need is we will need our with router higher order component from our React router DOM. And what we'll do is we're actually going to wrap the connected function inside of our with router. And the reason we can do this is because all of our higher order components, if you remember, return components, but also take components as their arguments. So with router is just taking the component that got returned from our connect call as its component argument. Now, the order in which we wrap them matters because with router will be what passes the match history and location objects that we first covered when we were looking at our with router higher order component into the component that is being wrapped. So we want what comes out of the connect component to receive those props. Because when you wrap components like this, it actually evaluates from inside out. So we'll actually get our connected component first, which will then pass in to our with router higher order component. And this way, our actual component will have access to the props that we're looking for, which in this case is history. Because what we want this onClick to do is just fire the function that will take us to history.push/checkout. And now if we save, we see that it takes us to our checkout page. Okay, now let's continue.